What if the first computer wasn't invented in Silicon Valley, but pulled from a sunken Roman ship? Could the ancients predict the future, and we just forgot how? The final chapter uncovers the chilling theory that someone may have erased this knowledge on purpose. And why? But before we dive in, let me know if you're enjoying this kind of long, controversial history. Feel free to tap that like button and subscribe, only if you truly love what I'm doing here. And in the comments, share where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your city. I always love seeing our little bedtime crew gathering from every corner of the world. Now lower your lights, maybe let a soft fan hum in the background, and settle in. Let's proceed with tonight's quiet journey together. Chapter 1. The Shipwreck That Changed History. The sea was calm the day the Diverse descended into the blue off the coast of Antikythera. Their goal was statues, relics from a lost Roman vessel said to have sunk in these waters nearly 2,000 years ago. They expected marble, gold, maybe coins scattered across the seabed. But as they moved through the shadows of the wreck, something unexpected caught their eye. Tangled in sea life and encrusted with rust, it looked like a lump of corroded bronze. At first glance, it was nothing special, just debris. But the texture was strange. Embedded in the crust were faint, intricate teeth. Gears. The divers had no idea what they had just found. It would take decades before anyone understood it. And when they finally did, the world would have to rethink everything it thought it knew about the ancient Greeks, and maybe about the limits of human history itself. The Antikythera wreck was more than just a graveyard of statues. As the salvaging efforts continued, piece after piece came up from the deep. Torso-less statues, amphorae, bronze limbs, jewelry, and fragments of something that defied explanation. Historians cataloged the obvious treasures first, but those curious bronze fragments seemed out of place. No previous wreck had yielded anything mechanical, and nothing from this time period should have had moving parts, let alone interlocking gears. In the chaos of transporting and preserving the artifacts, some fragments were forgotten in museum drawers. Others sat exposed, slowly oxidizing. No one could guess what they were looking at. Not yet. But this wasn't a case of misidentification. This was something so far ahead of its time, it simply didn't belong. The bronze pieces were eventually examined more closely. At first, they were assumed to be part of an astronomical instrument or some kind of navigational tool. But even that idea felt far-fetched. The Greeks weren't supposed to have had gear-based machines. That kind of mechanical sophistication was thought to have originated in the medieval Islamic world or Renaissance Europe. But here, buried in the seabed since the 1st century BCE, was an object made of over 30 bronze gears. The fragments were so corroded that their structure seemed like a natural formation at first. Only under the right lighting and angle could you catch a glimpse of their former complexity. And once that glimpse was caught, it sparked a quiet panic among historians. Something was off, deeply off. The Antikythera mechanism, as it would eventually be called, didn't fit any timeline. Not just because of its age, but because of what it implied. If the Greeks had built something this advanced, what else had they built and lost? Why were there no records? No other examples? Scholars were cautious at first. Theories floated around. Maybe it was a fluke. Maybe it was misunderstood. But each of those maybes collapsed under the growing weight of evidence. Hidden among the corroded bronze were tiny inscriptions, and beneath the rust, perfectly spaced gear teeth, crafted with ratios that suggested astronomical knowledge far beyond what the textbooks allowed. This was no legend. It was real, and it had survived long enough to challenge everything. When the device was first transported to the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, it didn't receive much attention. It was lumped in with other curious, unidentified fragments. The statues, after all, were more glamorous, more fitting to the image of ancient greatness. A rusted chunk of metal didn't seem exciting, not until close inspection began to change that. It was only when researchers noticed that some of the gear teeth matched lunar and solar cycles that curiosity deepened. These weren't gears for decoration. They were functional. This wasn't a tool for simple measurements. It was something that calculated. That realization began to echo through academic circles, quietly at first. Because if it was true, if this device had predictive functions, it would mean ancient technology was far more advanced than anyone had ever believed. The mystery thickened with every attempt to reverse engineer the device. Initial studies failed to capture the full structure. The gears were too damaged. The housing was mostly missing. The inscriptions, though in Greek, were faint and fragmented. Nothing about this was easy, but the questions only got louder. Why was something so sophisticated found on a ship with Roman artifacts? Was it being transported? Was it a gift? A treasure? Or was it something more dangerous? Something the owner didn't want falling into the wrong hands? And who exactly had the knowledge to build it? These questions haunted every researcher who laid eyes on it, because the more they uncovered, the less sense it made within the known historical record. The context of the shipwreck itself offered some hints, but not enough. It was likely a merchant vessel, carrying luxury items from the eastern Mediterranean to wealthy elites in Rome. Statues, fine glassware, jewelry, all symbols of status. But none of those artifacts hinted at a scientific or technological purpose. The Antikythera mechanism was the outlier, the black sheep among treasures. Its presence aboard the ship was either a coincidence or a clue. Perhaps it was stolen. Perhaps it was hidden. Or maybe it was being transported secretly for a purpose lost to time. One theory suggested it was a prototype, another that it was an heirloom passed between scholars. But all these were just guesses. The truth remained sealed behind 2,000 years of salt and secrecy. At the time of its recovery, the world wasn't ready to process what the mechanism represented. The early 1900s were a time of rising archaeology, but also rigid ideas about linear technological progress. In those views, innovation started with the Renaissance and moved forward. The Greeks, though brilliant, were artists and philosophers, not engineers. A gear-based device that could model the sky didn't fit. And because it didn't fit, it was sidelined. Even after initial interest, research slowed. Museums had priorities. Funding was scarce, and without modern imaging technology, the device remained more mystery than artifact. In a way, the world had recovered a miracle, then promptly buried it again in the drawers of doubt and delay. Years passed. The fragments sat in storage, gathering dust instead of attention. Occasionally, a researcher would revisit them, propose a theory, or sketch a diagram. But no one had the tools or the full picture to crack it open, and so the mystery remained dormant, like a forgotten cipher waiting for the right mind to decipher it. The gears sat frozen, corroded into silence, but even in their stillness, they whispered. They whispered of forgotten workshops, of minds that thought in mechanisms, of a time when the sky was not just watched but measured. Something ancient had reached for the future, and no one knew why. The fact that it came from Greece was another twist. The Greeks had long been credited with mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy, but physical machines, working models of the cosmos, that was new territory. The few existing Greek texts that mention gears were vague and theoretical. Nothing matched the complexity found in the Antikythera mechanism, which raised another unsettling possibility. Maybe there were more. Maybe this wasn't the first of its kind. Maybe the real story was much larger, and we had only stumbled on one surviving piece of a puzzle too big to see. The implication lingered like a shadow over the historical narrative. It wasn't just the complexity of the device that was shocking. It was the precision. The gear ratios aligned with known astronomical cycles, some accurate to within a single day over multiple years. These weren't rough estimates. They were deliberate, mathematical, elegant. It suggested a culture not just interested in the stars, but capable of predicting their movements with mechanical logic. And if that was true, then why had we never heard of such machines before? The silence was deafening. It was as if history itself had chosen to forget, or perhaps been made to forget. This chapter in history, once opened, refused to close. The Antikythera mechanism had emerged from the sea not just as an artifact, but as a challenge, a crack in the wall of what we thought the ancients were capable of. And now that the crack had formed, the pressure behind it was growing. Something had to give, because the more we stared into the gears, the more we felt they were staring back, measuring us, questioning our assumptions. What else have we lost to time? What else waits to be found? Chapter 2. The machine no one could understand. For years after its discovery, the strange bronze object sat in quiet obscurity. It was too damaged to identify and too bizarre to ignore. Researchers poked at it with curiosity, but none dared make sweeping claims. They cataloged it as a curiosity, a mechanical oddity, something the ancients couldn't possibly have understood, let alone built. The idea that this lump of corroded metal might contain gears, real gears, was unsettling. It challenged the narrative of linear progress. So, instead of confronting it, many scholars looked away. Some suggested it was a navigational aid. Others thought it was a decorative artifact mimicking something mechanical. But no one could explain its purpose. No one had the tools to see inside. And no one could admit that maybe, just maybe, the ancients knew something we didn't. And so it sat, quietly mocking our confidence, as the 20th century marched forward, blind to the ghost in its museum case. The mechanism was broken, fractured into dozens of pieces. Most of the gears were partially dissolved, eaten away by 2,000 years of salt and pressure. What remained was trapped under layers of calcification and rust. It was like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing and the picture rubbed out. The few gears that remained visible were complex, too complex for the time they supposedly came from. Their teeth were small, evenly spaced, and precisely cut. This wasn't guesswork, it was engineering, and that, more than anything, created unease. How could a civilization known for stone columns and philosophical debates produce something so mechanical? Where were the other machines? The texts, the blueprints? The silence was suffocating. Each unanswered question only deepened the mystery. The fragments refused to speak, but their very existence screamed in contradiction to the accepted timeline of history. In dusty museum backrooms, the device became a whispered fascination. Occasionally, a curious academic would pick it up, turn it over, and wonder aloud. But without the tools to peer inside, they could only speculate. Some saw it as a calendar, others as a complex astrolabe. But every theory ran into the same wall. Nothing else like it had ever been found. And nothing in the known Greek world pointed to this kind of mechanical sophistication. So most researchers did what humans often do when faced with something that breaks the mold. They ignored it. The statues took center stage. The coins got their plaques. And the mechanism, it was pushed aside, classified as enigmatic, then forgotten. But a few brave thinkers kept looking, and their persistence would one day crack open the door to a deeper truth, though they wouldn't live to see it. In the mid-20th century, an attempt was made to sketch out what the mechanism might have looked like before it broke apart. Using careful measurements and assumptions based on surviving gear fragments, a crude model was proposed. It had interlocking gears. It rotated in multiple axes, but its purpose remained elusive. Every theory seemed to create more problems. If it tracked time, how did it do so without hands or dials? If it modeled the sky, where were the celestial symbols? Even with the best minds on the case, the device resisted definition. Like a lock without a key, its precision mocked the crudeness of the tools used to study it. Every observation raised new questions, and behind those questions lingered a darker possibility, that our understanding of history had a blind spot, a void into which the Antikythera mechanism had fallen, carrying its secrets with it. Meanwhile, new fragments were still being found. Some had tiny inscriptions, so small they were nearly invisible to the naked eye. Ancient Greek text, etched in bronze. But corrosion had blurred many of the letters, making translation difficult. Even when the language was clear, the meanings weren't. The phrases were technical, abstract, often mathematical. Mentions of cycles, rotations, and astronomical terms. Hints at something big, but never a full explanation. It was as if the device was part of a larger conversation, and we had stumbled into the middle of it without hearing the beginning. The texts were clues, yes, but they were also teases. Enough to prove the device was meant for calculation, prediction, maybe even divination. But not enough to explain how it worked, or why it existed. And so, decade after decade, the fragments gathered dust, whispering only to those willing to listen closely. The academic world remained split. Some believed the device was real and important. Others dismissed it as a one-off anomaly, the result of clever craftsmanship but not indicative of broader knowledge. After all, if the Greeks could build such things, why weren't there more? Why hadn't history left us a trail of similar inventions? The absence of context fed the skepticism, and so the Antikythera mechanism existed in limbo, respected by some, ridiculed by others. Its mystery was too large to ignore, but too inconvenient to embrace. Like an ancient riddle with no answer. For many, it became a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the most extraordinary discoveries can be swallowed by doubt, bureaucracy, and the slow grind of academic gatekeeping. But there was another reason the mechanism was hard to believe. It wasn't just that it was old. It was too advanced. Modern historians had a clear idea of how technology evolved. First came the abacus, then simple gears, then clocks, then telescopes. But the Antikythera mechanism didn't fit that order. It jumped too many steps. Its precision rivaled that of 18th century clockwork. But it was built over 1,500 years earlier. It was like finding a jet engine buried in an ancient Roman temple. You could see the parts, recognize the craftsmanship, but the timeline made no sense. It implied a branch of knowledge that had risen and fallen in silence. And that was a frightening thought, because if something that advanced had existed once, what else might have been forgotten? What other technologies had history buried before they could change the world? That fear fed a new wave of speculation. Some believed the device had been imported from the East. Others thought it was a lost invention from a forgotten genius. But none of these theories held up under scrutiny. The Greek inscriptions proved it was made in the Hellenistic world. And the craftsmanship suggested a tradition, not a one-time spark of brilliance, which meant there had to be more. Other mechanisms, other inventors, other workshops. And yet, there were none. The trail ended with this one device. It was like discovering a single page of a book, burned around the edges, and realizing it belonged to a story too vast to comprehend. But every line hinted at something extraordinary, and every attempt to dismiss it only made it more intriguing. The gears themselves offered more than physical proof, they revealed intent. Someone had designed this with purpose. The ratios weren't random. They matched lunar and solar cycles, suggesting that the mechanism was meant to track celestial movements. But was that all? Could it predict eclipses? Did it forecast planetary alignments? The complexity hinted at something more than observation. It hinted at prediction, control. If the ancients could model the heavens with this device, what else did they believe they could influence? Were they using it for science, religion, power? These weren't just academic questions. They struck at the heart of human curiosity. Because if someone in the ancient world had figured out how to map time itself, what did they plan to do with that knowledge? The mystery remained unsolved as the decades passed. Generations of researchers aged and retired, passing the puzzle on to the next. Each brought new ideas, new tools, but the core mystery remained. No one could fully reconstruct the device. No one could explain its purpose with certainty. It was as if the mechanism itself resisted understanding, as though it had been built in a context now entirely lost. An artifact not just from another time, but from another mindset. One where logic and mysticism might have blended, where knowledge wasn't compartmentalized, but holistic. The mechanism sat at the crossroads of science, philosophy, and perhaps even prophecy. And without that cultural map, modern minds struggled to navigate its meaning. And yet, the Antikythera mechanism refused to fade away. It lingered in the minds of those who studied it, a mechanical ghost, a riddle cast in bronze. Its very existence challenged the story we told ourselves about who we were and how we got here. It whispered of forgotten brilliance, erased wisdom, and the fragility of progress. It was a time bomb buried in the sands of history, waiting for the right moment to explode. And as the 20th century came to a close, that moment was approaching. A new generation of scientists, armed with technology the ancient world could never dream of, were about to confront the past in ways no one expected. And what they would uncover would change everything. Chapter 3: When Science Finally Caught Up. The Antikythera fragments had waited long enough. For most of the 20th century, they sat in silence, enigmatic, corroded, and shrouded in confusion. But time had a way of circling back. By the late 1970s, science had caught up to the mystery. A new wave of researchers emerged, armed not with chisels or guesses, but with tools that could see through metal. X-ray imaging and computed tomography changed everything. For the first time, they could peer inside without damaging the precious bronze. What they saw inside stunned even the most skeptical minds. There were gears, dozens of them, interlocked, calculated, purposeful. These weren't random. These were components in a system. The mechanism had been quiet for 2,000 years, but under the gaze of modern technology, it began to speak. And as it did, a hidden language of logic and astronomy began to unfold, one that no one expected from the ancient world. The first detailed scans revealed something astonishing. Some of the gears had unusual tooth counts, irregular numbers that seemed meaningless at first. But when plugged into astronomical cycles, they made perfect sense. A 223-tooth gear matched the Saros cycle used to predict eclipses. Another matched the Metonic cycle, a 19-year lunar solar calendar. These were not coincidences. The gear ratios weren't decorative. They were mathematical. This wasn't just a model of the sky. It was a machine built to anticipate it. Every rotation, every cog, every etched dial served a purpose. Modern engineers marveled at its sophistication. Historians were left breathless. The Greeks had managed to encode complex celestial mathematics into a hand-powered device. And they had done it with bronze tools and no electricity 2 millennia ago. The implications were earth-shaking. Someone had figured out how to model time itself, not just watch it pass. The breakthrough sparked a wave of renewed interest. Teams of mathematicians, physicists, and computer scientists joined forces with historians and archaeologists. Together, they reconstructed what the original mechanism might have looked like before time and the sea had broken it apart. A wooden frame roughly the size of a shoebox, a hand crank on the side, front and back dials, a complex arrangement of gears inside, many now missing, but their imprints left behind like fingerprints. From the recovered parts, they built digital replicas. Each model told the same story. The device could track the sun, the moon, and maybe even the 5 known planets of the time. It could show their positions, predict eclipses, and align with major festivals. The Antikythera mechanism wasn't just a calendar. It was a celestial simulator, a machine that made the heavens predictable, mechanical, and, for the first time, knowable. Even more astonishing were the inscriptions. High-resolution imaging revealed thousands of Greek characters, tiny, often invisible to the naked eye. These weren't just labels. They were instructions, technical guides. Some described dials, others explained cycles, and a few even outlined how the mechanism calculated specific astronomical events. It was as if the builder had left a manual etched in metal. The language was terse but deliberate. Some of it matched known Greek astronomical concepts, while other terms hinted at forgotten theories. Together, they formed a bridge between practical mechanics and philosophical understanding. This wasn't just about predicting when the moon would be full. It was about syncing the divine rhythms of the sky with the human world below. The machine spoke the language of order, time, and destiny. And for the first time in modern history, we were learning to translate it. As the models became more refined, a clear picture began to form. The front dial likely showed the zodiac and the position of the sun and moon. The back contained spiral dials for the Saros and Metonic cycles. Smaller subsidiary dials tracked leap years, lunar phases, and possibly the Olympic Games. The crank wasn't just for display, it was functional. Turning it advanced the entire cosmos, simulating years of motion in seconds. It was both scientific tool and symbolic artifact. An ancient computer made not of silicon but of bronze, wood, and genius. And the more researchers studied it, the more eerie its accuracy became. It didn't just follow the heavens, it predicted them. Something modern civilization had once thought impossible without telescopes or computers had been done by hand. And forgotten. Some scholars began to wonder, was this the only one? Or had there been a tradition of making such devices? The sophistication suggested refinement, not a prototype but a product of experience. Yet no other mechanisms had ever been found. No blueprints, no workshop ruins, no mentions in surviving texts. It was as if the entire lineage had been erased. And that silence was almost as shocking as the device itself. Because if the Greeks had reached this level of mechanical understanding, why did it vanish so completely? Was it destroyed, suppressed? Or had the knowledge simply been lost in a world too unstable to preserve it? Wars, fires, invasions, any number of catastrophes could have swept it away. But the perfection of the Antikythera mechanism suggested something more chilling. That humanity might not just forget. It might be made to forget. Meanwhile, modern engineers tried to replicate it. Using only ancient tools and methods, some managed to reconstruct the mechanism from scratch. What they found confirmed the original builder's brilliance. The gears weren't just shaped, they were calculated. The builders had used fractional gear ratios and epicyclic gearing systems, concepts thought to be invented centuries later. And they had done it without power tools, digital readouts, or industrial precision. Only logic, math, and patience. The machine's tolerances were tight. Its layout was elegant. It wasn't crude, it was beautiful. The gears moved smoothly, just as they had once beneath the hands of a Greek astronomer over 2,000 years ago. The realization hit hard. This wasn't a relic. It was a masterwork, and the mind behind it had been centuries ahead of its time. One of the most haunting moments came when a full-scale replica was finally turned by hand. As the gears began to spin, the dials advanced. The moon shifted through its phases. The dates aligned. The eclipse indicator ticked toward a known event in the past. It worked. 2,000 years later, it still worked. The gears were speaking across millennia, and they were saying something no one had expected. The past was not as primitive as we believed. The Greeks hadn't just theorized the motion of the heavens. They had built it, captured it, rendered it mechanical, and then let it disappear. By the early 2000s, the mechanism had been fully scanned using advanced 3D tomography. Every hidden gear was digitally revealed. Every tooth counted. Every inscription cataloged. The data was public, and with it, a flood of new questions. Why had this knowledge been so thoroughly lost? Why had no one written about it? Some pointed to the Library of Alexandria, which may have housed similar inventions. Others blamed the Roman conquests, the Christian suppression of pagan science, or the gradual decay of Hellenistic knowledge. But no single answer satisfied. The silence surrounding the Antikythera mechanism felt intentional, like a curtain had been drawn, and behind it, something bigger waited. The final revelation was the most unsettling. As researchers mapped the mechanism's potential capabilities, they found signs it may have shown not only solar and lunar events, but planetary ones as well. Venus, Mercury, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. The 5 visible planets to the naked eye, tracked by gear-based models long before modern astronomy had the math to explain their orbits. This wasn't just a clock. It was a full-scale cosmological engine, and its purpose may not have been limited to science. Could have served ritual, prophecy, or control, because whoever understood the skies could influence what happened on Earth, and whoever controlled that knowledge held power. The Antikythera mechanism no longer sat in silence. Through scans, simulations, and replicas, it had begun to speak again. Its gears turned once more, not just in bronze, but in the minds of those who studied it. The ancients had found a way to touch the future and left behind the blueprint. But the world had to be willing to see it. The deeper we looked, the more it revealed. Not just about the stars, but about ourselves. Because the real question wasn't how the Greeks built it. It was why we ever forgot they could. Chapter 4: What the Greeks were really calculating. The Antikythera mechanism was not just a machine. It was a key, one designed to unlock time itself. As modern reconstructions began to simulate its full functions, researchers discovered something startling. It didn't just show the date. It calculated the movements of the heavens. The sun, the moon, and potentially even the planets all could be modeled by turning its crank. But this raised a deeper question. Why would an ancient Greek need to do that? What practical purpose did it serve? Was it scientific curiosity, religious ritual, political strategy, or something far stranger? This was no idle toy. The complexity of its functions pointed to intention, to purpose, and behind that purpose, perhaps a worldview that merged mathematics with mysticism. Every rotation mirrored something celestial, but the mechanism didn't just follow the sky, it seemed to anticipate it. And that kind of foresight in the ancient world could grant someone more than understanding, could grant them power. The device's ability to predict eclipses was one of its most unsettling features. Using the Saros cycle gear, containing 223 teeth, one for each lunar month in the cycle, it could pinpoint both solar and lunar eclipses with impressive accuracy. Not only that, but some inscriptions even seemed to predict their intensity and direction. To an ancient observer, this would have looked like magic. Imagine priests, astronomers, or rulers using it to declare omens, time sacrifices, or justify wars. When an eclipse darkened the sun, those who understood it could claim divine insight. And when the common people watched the sky obey a machine, their trust in the operator would deepen. Knowledge like this was not just academic, it was strategic. The Antikythera mechanism may have functioned like an oracle made of gears, and those who wielded it, knowingly or not, were playing with forces far larger than timekeeping. Then there was the moon. The mechanism didn't just show lunar phases. It modeled the moon's strange, irregular orbit, what we now call the lunar anomaly. The Greeks understood that the moon didn't move in a perfect circle. Its speed varied as it traveled through the sky. To replicate this variation, the mechanism used a clever design, a pin and slot gear system. As it turned, It mimicked the moon's shifting velocity, matching observational data known only to careful skywatchers. This wasn't approximation. It was engineering built on astronomy, which meant whoever built it not only observed these irregularities, but understood them well enough to encode them mechanically. That kind of insight required generations of observation, and yet somehow it was embedded in a single device, a box of bronze and wood that held secrets the rest of the world wouldn't rediscover for over 1,000 years. But the mechanism didn't stop at the moon and sun. Evidence suggests it may have modeled planetary motion as well. Researchers found gears whose ratios align suspiciously well with the synodic periods of visible planets like Venus and Mercury. Though parts of the planetary section are missing, its structure implies a level of complexity few dared imagine. Modeling planetary motion, especially with retrograde paths, requires sophisticated gear trains and epicyclic calculations. And yet, here they were, at least partially, which begged the question, did the Greeks possess a working model of the cosmos? A machine that could replicate not just solar events, but the entire sky in motion? If so, the Antikythera mechanism wasn't merely a calendar. It was a miniature universe, an analog computer representing the heavens, handcrafted in bronze, long before Copernicus or Kepler had ever been born. The inclusion of the zodiac scale confirmed that the mechanism was also linked to astrology. The front dial showed the 12 signs of the zodiac, corresponding to the ecliptic path of the sun. Ancient Greeks believed celestial alignments influenced earthly events. Timing was everything. Wars, harvests, coronations, and rituals were aligned with planetary positions. If the Antikythera mechanism could simulate those positions in advance, it would have been a tool not just of science, but of prophecy. It offered foresight, prediction, and control. And if only a few understood how to use it, those few would hold extraordinary influence. The device may have looked like a calculator, but it acted like a seer, a mechanical prophet whispering to those who could listen. And that changed everything, because now the question wasn't just what it did. It was who had the right to use it and why. One inscription seemed to reference the Olympic Games, suggesting the mechanism also tracked major civic or religious festivals. This meant its purpose extended beyond astronomy into the social and political spheres. In ancient Greece, the timing of festivals, rituals, and games was crucial. They marked calendars, organized life, and signaled harmony between the heavens and human affairs. A machine that could predict these events and align them with celestial phenomena would be invaluable. It would allow rulers to set dates with divine authority, or priests to claim cosmic approval. It wasn't about keeping time. It was about owning it. The Antikythera mechanism, then, wasn't just about knowledge. It was about control. Those who held the mechanism didn't just read the stars. They decided when those stars mattered most. The deeper researchers dug, the more the lines blurred between science and ritual. In the ancient world, these domains weren't separate. Mathematics was sacred. Astronomy was divine. To predict an eclipse was not to outsmart nature. It was to speak the language of the gods. And the Antikythera mechanism may have been their translator. Its design was meticulous, its function elegant, but behind its gears lay something more elusive: intent. Was it built for teaching, for worship, for ruling? Each possibility painted a different picture of its creators. If it was meant for science, then it was a marvel of rational achievement. If it was built for divination, then it was a technological talisman. And if it served the state, then it was a machine of power hidden behind the veil of mystery. There's something unsettling about a machine that makes time feel manipulable. The mechanism didn't just observe, it predicted. It moved events into the realm of the expected. But with that comes a deeper unease. Did the Greeks believe they were mastering fate? That by turning a crank they could glimpse the future? And if so, who got to turn it? Was it kept in a temple? Palace? Was it passed between philosophers or hoarded by elites? We have no record of its usage. No writings describe it, which suggests secrecy, exclusivity, perhaps even fear. Because once you possess a machine that can chart the sky, the world below no longer looks random. It looks designed. And in that design, some might see order, others control. Today, we interpret the Antikythera mechanism through our lens, science, logic, data. But to the ancients, it may have carried deeper meaning. It could have been used to validate rule, interpret omens, or manipulate belief. With it, the boundaries between knowledge and myth collapsed. The stars became gears. Time became predictable, and the chaos of existence seemed suddenly governed by invisible hands. The mechanism's true power may not have been its accuracy, but its symbolism. A reminder that the universe moved in patterns, and someone had captured those patterns in bronze. What that meant to ancient minds is hard to say, but its influence must have been profound. The Antikythera mechanism invites us to rethink how ancient people viewed reality. We imagine them looking to the sky with wonder, but perhaps they were doing more than watching. Perhaps they were calculating, predicting, planning. This was not a passive world of myths and gods. It was one in which the heavens were mechanized, mirrored in bronze wheels turned by human hands. In that sense, the mechanism didn't just model the cosmos, claimed it, rendered it small enough to hold, and in doing so, it made time, a force once reserved for gods, something that could be grasped, predicted, and even rewritten. So what were the Greeks really calculating? The answer may be all of it. The movements of the sky, the passage of time, the cycles of fate. But more than that, they were calculating control. Control over chaos, over nature, over belief. The Antikythera mechanism wasn't just a machine. It was a message, one that said the world could be known. And once it was known, it could be ruled. That's what made it powerful. That's what made it dangerous. And that may be why, in the centuries that followed, it was hidden, buried not just beneath the waves, but beneath history itself. Chapter 5: A Forgotten Legacy of Lost Technology. The Antikythera mechanism proved one thing beyond doubt. The ancient Greeks had achieved a level of mechanical sophistication that modern history had never credited them with. And yet, the silence that followed its creation is deafening. No copies survived. No workshop ruins have ever been found. No philosopher, scholar, or craftsman ever mentioned it in writing. The machine stands alone, orphaned by time. How could something so advanced appear in one place once and never again? That question haunts historians and engineers alike. It feels less like the product of a forgotten science and more like a ghost, not lost through natural decay, but wiped away deliberately, as if someone somewhere wanted it erased. That kind of disappearance doesn't just happen. Knowledge leaves traces, but here the trail goes cold. And in that void, we are left to imagine what else the ancient world may have known. What other marvels might have flickered briefly into existence, only to be buried by time or silenced by power. Theories swirl like dust through forgotten libraries. Some believe the mechanism was a one-of-a-kind creation, the masterpiece of a single genius whose work was never replicated. But that feels unlikely. The complexity of the Antikythera mechanism suggests refinement, not experimentation. It shows a mastery of gears and ratios, implying earlier prototypes, predecessors, and a lineage of mechanical thought. So where are they? The answer may lie in the fragility of knowledge. Ancient machines were often built from perishable materials, wood, bronze, parchment. And in a world where fire and conquest swept cities into ash, much could be lost in a single night. The Great Fire at the Library of Alexandria, the sacking of Athens, the fall of Rome, each was a blade slashing through humanity's memory. And sometimes all it takes is one missing link to break an entire chain. But some silences feel more deliberate. Greek and Roman texts obsess over philosophy, mathematics, and architecture. Yet the intricate science of geared mechanisms is conspicuously absent.
No diagrams, no blueprints.
No praise for the craftsmen who built such wonders. This suggests not forgetfulness, but censorship. When empires rise, they choose which knowledge to preserve and which to bury. The Roman Empire, for all its might, had little interest in promoting Hellenistic science. Later, when Christianity swept through the Mediterranean, many pagan texts were destroyed as heretical. In these purges, technologies linked to astrology or divination were especially targeted. Could the Antikythera mechanism have been condemned not for what it was, but for what it represented? A pagan machine that predicted the future might have been seen as dangerous, unholy, something to be hidden away, or worse, destroyed. Still, remnants of ancient ingenuity flicker through history like sparks. Descriptions of complex automata appear in scattered texts. Hero of Alexandria wrote about machines powered by air, steam, and water. Mechanical theaters, coin dispensers, even singing birds. Yet no working examples survive. As if the knowledge hovered at the edge of civilization, never allowed to take root. The Antikythera mechanism could have been the crown jewel of a lost mechanical age, a peak that was never climbed again. And once that knowledge was gone, the world regressed. The Dark Ages weren't just a loss of culture, but of capability. For over 1,000 years, nothing remotely similar appeared. Gearwork returned only in medieval clocks, clumsy and crude by comparison. It was as though humanity had to start from scratch, without knowing it had already touched the stars with bronze fingers. This raises a haunting possibility. What if the Antikythera mechanism was not the peak, but the echo? A surviving fragment from an even older, deeper technological tradition? The Greek world inherited knowledge from Egypt, Babylon, and beyond. Oral traditions and lost manuscripts may have carried blueprints never written down. Machines, once widespread, could have been forgotten over generations. All it would take is war, plague, and the death of a few key minds. Innovation is fragile, can vanish in a single generation. And if society lacks the infrastructure to preserve it, even the brightest invention will fade into myth. That may be the true tragedy of the Antikythera mechanism. Not that it was lost, but that its loss was inevitable in a world that didn't know how to protect what it had. Even its shipwreck burial feels symbolic. The device sank into the ocean, sealed in a tomb of salt and coral, preserved but forgotten. It lay hidden while the world above moved on, fighting wars, building empires, rewriting truths. The survival was a miracle, but its isolation speaks volumes. The ship that carried it may have been transporting it away from its makers, or delivering it into secrecy. Was it being hidden or stolen? We'll never know. But its presence at the bottom of the sea is no accident. It reminds us that history is often written by survivors, not by the best ideas, but by those who could protect their stories. The Antikythera mechanism slipped through the cracks. A whisper from a civilization that knew more than we ever imagined, and said less than we'd ever hoped. There is another possibility, one more unsettling, that those in power chose to let the knowledge die. A device that could model the skies, predict eclipses, and track celestial bodies would be an incredible tool, but also a threat. If widely understood, it could decentralize authority. Anyone could predict omens. Anyone could align rituals. Anyone could challenge the divine timing of kings or priests. Perhaps that's why it vanished. Perhaps its destruction was not an accident of history, but a decision. Technology in the wrong hands becomes chaos. Easier than to control the people by controlling the stars. And if that required forgetting how the heavens moved, so be it. Better a dark age than an age of open eyes. That's the danger of forbidden knowledge. It doesn't have to be erased. It only has to be feared. So we are left with fragments. Gears without context, brilliance without legacy. But the Antikythera mechanism forces us to ask a larger question. How many other inventions have we lost? How many breakthroughs vanished before they could change the world? We think of progress as a straight line, but history is full of detours. False starts, collapsed ladders. Sometimes the future knocks early, and no one answers. The Antikythera mechanism was one of those knocks. Could have changed the course of science. It could have inspired a revolution centuries before Galileo. But instead, it waited beneath the sea, alone, a relic of a future that never came. Modern civilizations pride themselves on advancement, but the mechanism humbles us. It reminds us that genius is not new, that the ancients were not naive, that they, too, solved impossible problems with limited tools. And yet, their most advanced creations did not survive. Not because they failed, but because society did. The Antikythera mechanism didn't disappear in flames. It disappeared in silence, ignored, misunderstood, and finally forgotten, until someone found it again. And by then, we had to start all over. That loss is not just historical, it's personal, because it means we are always one generation away from forgetting everything we think we know. And yet, the gears still turn, not in bronze, but in memory. Every scholar who studies the device, every engineer who builds a replica, keeps that legacy alive. Each tooth is a rebuke to the idea that ancient means primitive. And every discovery adds weight to a larger truth, that history is not what we remember. It's what we choose to remember. The Antikythera mechanism is proof that forgetting can be deliberate, that technology can vanish not because it was impossible, but because it was inconvenient. The question now is, what else have we buried? Chapter 6. The clues hidden in plain sight. The Antikythera mechanism was once believed to be an anomaly, an outlier in an otherwise primitive age. But over time, a disturbing pattern has begun to emerge. Scattered across the ancient world are hints, relics, and writings that suggest it was not entirely alone. These traces were ignored for centuries, dismissed as curiosities or misinterpreted as symbolic art. But now, with the benefit of hindsight and technology, a new question arises. What if the Antikythera mechanism was just the best preserved of a forgotten tradition? A final survivor of a lost lineage of machines? If so, it means we have been living among clues for generations, blind to their meaning. Some are buried in the ruins of forgotten cities. Others sit on museum shelves, misidentified and overlooked. But once you know what to look for, precision, purpose, and patterns, the ancient world begins to whisper. And the whispers all point to one conclusion. The past may have been far more advanced than we ever dared to believe. Take, for example, the Baghdad battery, a small clay jar with a copper cylinder and an iron rod. Found in modern-day Iraq, it dates back over 2,000 years. At first glance, it looks like little more than a storage container. But when reconstructed and filled with an acidic liquid, it produces a small electric charge. Was it a coincidence? A misunderstood artifact? Or something else entirely? Some believe it was used for electroplating, an early method to coat metal with gold or silver. Others think it was used in rituals. But regardless of its true function, it suggests a deep knowledge of chemistry and experimentation. Not primitive guesses, but directed inquiry. And if electricity was being harnessed, even at a basic level, it challenges everything we thought we knew about ancient science. It suggests that innovation wasn't linear. It flared in different places at different times, then vanished again. Then there's Heron's steam engine. Built in Alexandria in the 1st century AD, it was called the Yalapile. A hollow sphere mounted on a pair of pipes. It spun when steam flowed through it. It was the first recorded steam-powered device, but no one followed up on it. It was treated as a toy, a novelty. Yet the principle it demonstrated, the conversion of heat into motion, is the very foundation of the Industrial Revolution. If Heron's device had been scaled up, it could have transformed the ancient world. Steam-powered ships, mechanical labor, entire cities running on heat. But it wasn't, and that's the mystery. Did they fail to see its potential? Or were there limits imposed by politics, religion, or fear? Heron also described automated doors, coin-operated machines, and puppet theaters powered by gears and water pressure. These weren't ideas. They were working machines. And yet, like the Antikythera mechanism, they disappeared. Another strange artifact is the Roman dodecahedron, found across Europe in dozens of archaeological sites. These 12-faced bronze objects have mystified scholars for centuries. Their precise geometric shapes and varied hole sizes hint at function, not decoration. Some suggest they were surveying tools or used for calculating distances. Others propose they were astronomical instruments, perhaps used to measure angles of sunlight or alignments with stars. But no one knows for certain. What is clear is that their craftsmanship was meticulous, and that they were widespread. Like the Antikythera mechanism, they show a blending of math and material, an attempt to make the intangible visible. If they were tools, then their use has been lost. But if they were spiritual, their precision suggests a worldview where science and ritual coexisted. Either way, they reveal minds reaching for deeper truths, minds not unlike our own. Ancient texts also hold tantalizing clues. Pliny the Elder, Cicero, and others wrote about devices that simulated the heavens. Archimedes was said to have created a model that displayed the movements of the sun, moon, and planets. These accounts were once dismissed as exaggerations or poetic metaphor, but after the discovery of the Antikythera mechanism, they take on new weight. Perhaps these weren't myths at all. Perhaps the mechanism we found off the coast of Antikythera was not the first, but the last, a culmination of ideas stretching back generations. Lost texts, burned libraries, and fragmented scrolls may have once contained the blueprints for entire schools of mechanical thought. The knowledge was there, but we forgot how to read it. Now we look back at these writings with fresh eyes and find that they speak not of dreams, but of machines. Even in South America, there are signs of unexpected complexity. The Inca, who lacked a written language, used quipu, knotted strings that encoded information. Some believe they were more than just accounting tools, that they stored calendars, records, even oral histories, like a mechanical form of writing. In the ancient city of Tiwanaku, precision-cut stones fit together with microscopic accuracy, using techniques we still don't fully understand. These aren't direct links to the Antikythera mechanism, but they show a pattern that ancient peoples across the world pursued structure, systems, and tools for measuring time, space, and knowledge. The Greeks weren't alone. They were part of a global mosaic of intelligence, a puzzle whose pieces have yet to be fully assembled. Modern archaeologists are beginning to revisit old discoveries with new perspectives. Artifacts once written off as ceremonial are now being tested for utility. Statues with strange markings are examined for astronomical alignments. Ancient buildings are being scanned for acoustic properties and mathematical symmetries. As we bring 21st century tools into 2,000-year-old ruins, we find that the ancients may have been more exacting than we realized. The question isn't whether they were capable. It's why their capabilities were hidden. Was it because later cultures didn't understand what they saw, or because they didn't want to? Sometimes, a mystery stays buried not because it's invisible, but because it's inconvenient. We must also ask how many clues we've lost to misinterpretation. A broken gear might look like a coin. A corroded dial could be mistaken for jewelry. Thousands of artifacts lie in storage, mislabeled, forgotten. In the Antikythera mechanism, one piece was misidentified as a decorative handle for decades. Only modern imaging revealed its true purpose. What else are we missing? If the machine hadn't been found with other statues, would it have ever been recovered? Or would it still lie buried, mistaken for rubble? The line between treasure and trash is thinner than we think. And history doesn't always correct itself. Sometimes it needs a second look. These forgotten inventions are not just curiosities. They change our understanding of human potential. They force us to admit that progress is not inevitable, that history can stall, reverse, even erase itself. The Antikythera mechanism wasn't ahead of its time, it was of its time. And that time may have been richer, deeper, and stranger than we ever imagined. The clues were always there, hidden in temples, buried in wrecks, etched into stone, waiting for someone to see them not as fragments of superstition, but as remnants of brilliance. And now, slowly, the veil begins to lift. It is easy to believe we are the peak of human development. that our era alone possesses the knowledge and the tools to shape reality. But the past whispers otherwise. It whispers of minds that bent bronze into calculators, that aligned buildings with stars, that saw patterns in the sky and turned them into prophecy. These weren't myths, they were achievements, and they deserve more than passing curiosity. They deserve rediscovery, not to worship them, but to learn from them, to remember that every civilization, no matter how powerful, can forget. And when it does, even the most advanced machine can become nothing more than a mystery in the sand. So we come full circle. The Antikythera mechanism is not just a device. It is a symbol, a crack in the story we've been told about ourselves. And through that crack, light pours in, illuminating other forgotten wonders. They were never truly lost, just hidden in plain sight. Chapter 7. What they were afraid we'd discover. The Antikythera mechanism was never just a machine. It was a message, a whisper from the past that carried a secret, one so dangerous, so world-shifting, that perhaps it was never meant to survive. As we peel back the layers of bronze, coral, and time, a disturbing question rises. What was this machine really built to do? It wasn't merely a calendar or a map of the stars. It was a tool of precision, one that could predict celestial events, track lunar cycles, and possibly even calculate planetary alignments with stunning accuracy. For a civilization 2,000 years ago, such knowledge would have appeared godlike. That level of foresight wasn't just science. It was power, and power like that never goes unnoticed. Someone, whether priests, emperors, or scholars, must have realized what it meant. That whoever controlled the machine could control the narrative of fate. They could script the stars. Time wasn't just measured, it was manipulated. And not everyone would want that ability freely known. Ancient societies were built on the illusion of divine authority. The stars told stories, and those stories shaped empires. Kings ruled because omens said they should. Priests interpreted the heavens and declared when wars should be waged or rituals performed. But what happens when a machine removes the mystery? When prediction becomes mechanical and prophecy becomes predictable? The Antikythera mechanism may have stripped away the mystique that upheld ancient power structures. Suddenly, eclipses weren't signs from the gods. They were scheduled events. Moon phases could be forecasted, not feared. The power to interpret the skies would shift from the spiritual elite to whoever held the mechanism's gears in their hands. It was a quiet revolution, and like all revolutions, it threatened the balance. Maybe that's why it disappeared. Not because it failed, but because it succeeded too well. It worked, and that was the problem. Some researchers now suspect the device was tied to sacred calendars, hidden systems of timing used to structure religious ceremonies, political rituals, or even coronations. If that's true, then its knowledge wasn't public, it was privileged, reserved for a select few. Its gears may have turned in secret chambers, revealing dates long before they were announced. Perhaps it dictated when temples were opened, when offerings were made, or when armies were unleashed. It could have aligned events with eclipses or planetary positions, giving a divine sheen to earthly actions. If the masses believed the gods had spoken, they followed without question. But the machine removed the need for belief. It gave certainty, and certainty is dangerous when it undermines faith. The Antikythera mechanism may have been a backstage pass to reality, and the ones pulling its levers weren't prophets, they were planners, which makes its disappearance feel less like a tragedy and more like a cover-up. We often assume ancient people were passive, their knowledge shaped by fate. But history shows they were anything but. Empires guarded their secrets fiercely. Libraries were burned, inventions were buried. Knowledge wasn't lost accidentally, it was taken, stolen, suppressed. And mechanisms like Antikythera may have been casualties of that intellectual warfare. Its insights might have been outlawed, not forgotten. If rival nations had discovered it, it would have shattered illusions of superiority. Imagine Rome discovering that the Greeks had built machines to map the cosmos, or later empires realizing their sacred calendars were based on obsolete math. The mechanism wasn't just a marvel. It was a threat to every civilization that came after, because it meant they weren't the pinnacle of knowledge, they were the aftermath of a fall. And no ruler wants to be seen as ruling in the ruins of something greater. Some of the inscriptions recovered from the device reference cycles that repeat every 223 months. That's the Saros cycle, which predicts eclipses. But why would a device meant for sailors or merchants need to predict eclipses? Unless it was never meant for navigation. It was meant for something else. Rituals timed with celestial precision. Events arranged not by chance, but by design. And if that's true, the Antikythera mechanism wasn't just an astronomical computer, it was a schedule for fate, a blueprint of cosmic timing. Those who possessed it could engineer events to appear predestined. They didn't just observe the stars, they used them, and in doing so, they rewrote what prophecy even meant. No longer divine insight, just calculations. Numbers pretending to be miracles, and miracles, once decoded, become nothing but math. There are even darker theories. Some believe the mechanism may have been part of a larger network, one of several machines built to track time, space, and maybe more. A distributed system of knowledge, hidden across regions, each fragment holding part of the puzzle. Like pieces of a forbidden language only the elite could read. If true, that would make the Antikythera mechanism the survivor of a purge. The last voice of a silence system, one lost in shipwreck, while the others were lost to fire, theft, or deliberate destruction. The implications are chilling. It means we may never know the full extent of what was erased. All we have is this one machine speaking through corrosion and fragments, a relic of a forbidden intelligence, and a warning to those who seek too deeply into the past. What if that warning still echoes today? Modern scientists who study the mechanism often speak of the resistance they face. Institutions skeptical, funding denied. Museums reluctant to reclassify artifacts. There's inertia in history, momentum built on centuries of assumptions. And any challenge to those assumptions is met with silence or ridicule. But behind the scenes, whispers continue about other machines, other fragments hidden in vaults, cataloged under incorrect names, or dismissed as decorative. If the Antikythera mechanism is real, and it is, then others must have existed. And if they existed, why haven't they been found? The simplest answer is also the most disturbing, because someone already did, and chose not to tell us. In every empire, there have been guardians of knowledge. Some preserved it, others hoarded it, and a few destroyed it. What if the mechanism passed through the hands of such guardians? What if it was kept secret for generations, its existence buried beneath layers of mythology and misinformation. Those gears may have spun not just to track time, but to delay it, to keep truths hidden until the world was ready, or to ensure the world never would be. Because once knowledge like this is known, it cannot be unknown. And some knowledge reshapes everything. How we view the ancients, ourselves, our future. The Antikythera mechanism isn't just a machine. It's a crack in the wall of historical illusion. And through it we see something terrifying. A civilization that mastered time only to vanish. The most frightening idea is not that the Greeks lost the Antikythera mechanism. It's that they never meant to share it. That it was built in secret, used in secret, and discarded in secret. Not because it didn't work, but because it worked too well. And those who used it understood exactly what it meant. That the universe could be decoded. That fate could be predicted. That gods could be replaced by gears. And once that door opened, it couldn't be closed. Unless someone closed it for good. Sunk the knowledge with the ship. Let the sea keep its secret. For 2,000 years. So here we are, holding fragments of forbidden brilliance, trying to piece together what others tried so hard to erase. And as we do, the question shifts. It's no longer just about what the mechanism did. It's about what it exposed. A forgotten intelligence, a legacy buried by silence, and a terrifying possibility. Maybe history didn't lose the Antikythera mechanism. Maybe history was forced to forget it, because what it revealed was too powerful, too disruptive, too dangerous to remember. And now, as the machine's secrets unfold, gear by gear, cycle by cycle, we must ask the most unsettling question of all. If the Antikythera mechanism could predict the future, whose future was it predicting? Ours.